So, hello, we are live. So, my name is Intermezzo, and this is my first live stream that I'm hosting on my channel. And today's topic of discussion is vocation, which is a topic that I think is very important in our world today, specifically because I think that many people in our world are fairly lost and don't know what to do with their lives, especially young people. And I hope that this chat can hopefully give a little bit of guidance to people who perhaps on the younger side of the spectrum, so in high school and in college. However, at any point of life, I think that we can go help them to help discern what they should be doing with their life vocation wise. I'm here joined with King Chad and Pius.
Hey guys.
Hi there. Hi there.
Yeah. So I would like to go just about me, since this is my first video. I am currently I am pursuing a vocation in the medical field. And so I will be working as in the medical field, hopefully in the near future. So why don't you both, Pius and King Chad, tell me a little bit about you and why you are interested in vocation?
Chad, you want to go first?
Sure. My vocation, essentially, as it stands right now, I'm a university student, and I'm also a personal trainer part-time. And I have aspirations of becoming actually a lawyer, particularly a military lawyer. But right now, I'm just trying to get my education, and then eventually postgraduate education, and we're gonna see how it goes from there. The main thing that I occupy most of my time with, I think now, and what I want to use in order to bring awareness to, especially to fellow young people, is fitness. Right. That's why I'm also working part time in the fitness industry.
You want me to go now?
Yeah, go, Pius.
I've been discerning a call to religious life for a couple of years now, although it's really distinguished itself in the last 6 or 7 months since summer last year, since I was welcomed into the Catholic Church. I've been meditating on it for a while, but things have really been sticking out to me recently, and particularly a desire to aid the poor and impoverished of the world, people who feel rejected by their communities. I really feel a draw to serve, bring the hope of Christ to people in those communities. So I feel very drawn to joining a missionary priest order, which is what I'm looking into doing. And I've always felt drawn to travel as well. I've always had a wanderlust, and I've loved exploring other countries and cultures. And I think this would be a great way for me to apply that wanderlust to an actual, God-given career choice.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, like I said previously, so I feel called to medicine, largely because I've always been the kind of person who would really dedicate my time to helping people on a one-on-one level. I really enjoy that capacity to really educate other people and to help other people, specifically on advanced and complicated issues such as medicine. I think one thing is that I guess I was destined to work in the medical field because when I was 3 years old, I drew out my imaginary friend with a circulatory system. So I guess it kind of
That's so cute.
So I think we should kind of go into the questions now. So I think, especially for members of the chat or for viewers who might not be as familiar with vocation, I would like to kind of define, okay, what is vocation? And what I like to call, there are capital V vocations, religious vocations, and lowercase v vocations, or more secular occupational vocations. And what is the relevance of vocation in the modern world?
Who do you want us to go first?
You can go first, Pius.
Okay. So, of course, I'm pursuing a more religious vocation, but the term vocation really comes from a choice in the church whether to pursue religious life or a secular life, and usually choosing between marriage or religious is what it's usually referred to. But in general, especially in the modern world, vocation is really whatever we feel drawn to do, in a sense, whatever we feel like God is calling us to serve. And that's a very broad sort of way, because, of course, in the modern, a very broad sort of way of interpreting it, because of course, in the modern world, pursuing your dreams is not always a wise decision. If your dream is to, I don't know, open up a fast food restaurant, you probably aren't going to do very well with that. But usually vocation applies to a call from God to perform a specific task. At least that's how I think of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way how I break it down, so religious vocations I define as, so there are certain religious calls. So there's the religious call to be married or to lead the sacred single life or to be a member of the priesthood or to monk or vocation. In that
Those are the
sense.
two. That's probably the most well-known division, I suppose, between the vocations is married life or religious. Although, of course, if you look into clerical vocations, there's also um, what is it, lay celibacy and among others.
Yeah. So, King Chad, how do you feel like vocation, is it relevant in the world today?
I think it's incredibly relevant because it's, I mean, even whether we realize it or not, in some way, shape, or form, we'll be performing a vocation, even outside of religion, right? Because, capital V religion, especially, religious vocation, I consider that to be a service to God, and the secular vocation I consider to be a service amongst, our fellow humans, right? And, it's incredibly relevant because I think you do need both. Because whether you know it or not, you've already taken a certain form of vocation, whether you decide to get married or whether you decide to stay single your life.
There's also the fact that one can pursue a religious life while also performing a secular vocation as well.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, one of the orders I've been discerning, you can join as a brother instead of as a priest. And as a brother, instead of getting your master's in theology, you go and you get a master's in, say, nursing or carpentry or something like that. And you serve the people of the order in that field. And you produce income for it and you help the poor in that manner.
Interesting.
In medicine or through, woodworking or through law. I mean, really, the careers are you can pursue both a secular and religious career at the same time. Is essentially what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I actually know a priest who's actually a physician. So he's
really interesting.
Yes, so he's father doctor.
I've met a nun who was a nurse practitioner.
Yes, and I think that there are also some nuns who do some crazy, interesting medical stuff too, like neurosurgical nuns and stuff like that. So nuns who do neurosurgery, nuns who do
amazing.
medicine, and so I don't like to have necessarily this wall between vocation, like religious vocation and secular vocation, because I believe that we're kind of all called to a religious vocation, whether that is marriage or religious life or kind of a single life in prayer. But we're also, I believe, called to a secular vocation, as in, okay, I have heard the call to be a religious person, to be a member of a religious organization, or to be a member of married life. But now I also have to dedicate a part of my life to people around me as well. So I kind of believe that we kind of have a double vocation, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Of course, God doesn't just call us not to serve his people. I mean, one of his, during the Great Commission was we have to, preach the gospel to every living creature. We can't just, of course, there are monks who are called to, prayer in private, but, prayer serves a purpose to further the means of the rest of the people in God's community. So we all have a secular vocation alongside our religious one.
Mm-hmm. So I think my second question is, I guess, what is the status of vocation in the world? Or at least where are we in the modern context? And and obviously my opinion of it is just that I don't think that we really truly discern vocation anymore as a society. And so therefore I kind of think we're in a poor position. And then what are the consequences of the status of vocation in our society today?
Well, the fact that, vocational discernment usually requires a lot of prayer, and the fact that a lot of people, I mean, even ones who would deem themselves religious probably don't pray very much about, their choices in life because, they don't really consider them an aspect of the divine. But I don't think they realize just how much, God permeates our everyday choices, especially our ones about our future, like, what career we're going to enter into and how we're going to serve people and, even procure our own finances. I mean, that's all something that is ultimately in the hands of the Lord. And we can't ignore his importance in all this. which, I mean, I'm sure if you ask a college student, they probably don't really meditate on what they're pursuing, especially in any sort of divine sense.
No, I think what's going on. I think in the modern secular university. I mean, if you talk to people, um, who are in first year at least, I've heard the phrase, the common phrase, spiritual but not religious.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just, okay, so what are you doing with that? Right. And there's no fruit that comes out of it, because, I mean, I think Mathoma put it perfectly. He said, like, if you meditate on nothing, your head's going to be filled with nothing. Right. And there's kind of like this vague kind of interpretation of what prayer is or what meditation is, but not really truly understanding it, knowing of prayer, but not knowing prayer. And I think the uppercase vocations, I think, is starving right now in society, because, I mean, as Pius pointed out, there's a lack of prayer, and vocation, uppercase vocation especially, requires prayer as a prerequisite.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, like, how do you fix that, right?
Yeah, I think in my, like, from what I see, so from my experience working with high school, like when I was in high school, college, and so on, I think like we kind of have this very materialistic notion of the universe that we believe that we can have it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see a lot of people, it seems like their mentality is, and everybody wants to do something good. There isn't a person out there who strictly wants to be, this cartoonish figure of the greedy capitalist who takes all the money and enjoys life. And that's it. But I kind of feel like people, the mentality is, I want to be good, but not at the expense of my own comfort.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be good, but I don't want to have to sacrifice anything. And this notion of sacrifice, I think, is very much missing. And
that's actually a really good way to put it.
What do you say?
That's a really, really good way to put it.
Yes. And like sacrifice for me, I kind of feel like sacrifice is intrinsically connected to vocation. Sacrifice itself, it's derived from the word sacred. And so sacred and sacrament, meaning to make holy. And part of the importance of sacrifice, I feel like, in our society, about sacrificing something that you find pleasurable to go pursue a greater good, is something that is absent in our society today. And that's what's really hindering these both capital V vocation and lowercase v vocations, and our thoughts about them in the modern world.
Yeah, do you know what's interesting? I think the secular world does not encourage the sacrifice on the basis, that, well, essentially it's been the most wealthiest, the most decadent of humanity, right? I mean, there's no necessity for sacrifice on the individual level, I think, where we are. So this doesn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we live in a world, well, especially, I mean, in the first world in Europe and the United States, I mean, where sacrifice is almost completely optional because there's so much abundance.
Yeah, well, I think in a way, I don't think sacrifice is even optional here, because although we have an abundance of material wealth, I think that we tend to neglect not only the spiritual, but the communal wealth. And a lot of the patients that I work with, a lot of them suffer from just abandonment in general. And, and this is due directly, I think, to the breakdown of the family and the devaluement of marriage as a sacrament.
Yeah, I don't really think people understand just how much, one prayer for another person can do. And just to let somebody know that you actually are praying for them and care about them.
Yeah, I agree. There are, like I said, there's a lot of people in the hospital who are completely abandoned, and who don't have anybody who prays for them, anybody who thinks of them, or anybody who really cares for them. And in fact, if anything, I feel like a lot of these people in the hospital, they're treated very poorly by a lot of the people of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really sad. So I think one story I could say is I knew this one woman who had a very complicated medical history, very complicated course while in the hospital. But we were about to discharge her to home. And then we were contacted and we were told that her own family looted her home.
What?
So her kids and her kids, grandkids, nieces, they completely stole everything that she had.
Really?
Yes. And I think this is like something that really makes me like really drives me crazy, you know, because like this notion of self-sacrifice, this notion of, oh, family life is so important, in my opinion, that it really bothers me that the institution of marriage as a vocation is declining in the West.
Yeah, I think it's only going to get worse because with the aging population, with the baby boomers getting much older, I think we're going to see more of this. This generation, especially around my age, we're not learning, especially I think in large part, you know, parental respect, and I think this will translate to more abandonment. I think when
Mm-hmm.
people are starting to get more older, like I think they're even starting to talk about with the demographics. I think they're going to be projecting they're going to need a large amount of people to, you know, to the infrastructure that's going to be needed for the seniors. And I hope, and I mean, not to dwell on this topic for more than that is necessary, but I think this will just get worse if it's not dealt with properly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. So we do have a question in the chat. So, and the question is, since so many young people choose useless degrees and whatnot, how would you advise somebody on how to switch careers to gain better skills and a better job? So
Depends on the person's goals, I think.
I agree. I think it's unfortunately it's kind of a general question because
That's not really that. Although that like falls under maybe vocation in general, that's not really how you discern vocation. But
yes, I agree. I kind of think like this is a very complicated topic because some people with these quote unquote useless degrees, they're in so much debt that, you know, it's kind of hard to, you know, to pursue kind of to really pray and pursue a vocation when you have all that debt. You kind of need to pay it off.
yeah.
And so you're kind of at the mercy of, you know, the debt sharks at that point. And so you really kind of need to find whatever good paying job you can. You need to work your ass off, you know, maybe 70, 80 hours a week, try to find as many jobs as you can to pay that off. And then after that, you know, hopefully you'll become a much, when you're older and wiser after you've kind of accomplished that. First of all, I think that's a skill in and of itself to kind of pursue, like to kind of work that off. That's kind of a skill that's useful. But I think once you have your own house in order, then you can kind of pray a bit more about what you're called to do after you've paid off your debt. So I guess our next question is kind of a bit more personal, and I don't want either of you to dox yourself, but you can be as vague as you want. But what was your journey in choosing to do what you feel that you're called to do?
Interesting. I gotta think about this one just so I actually don't dox myself.
Yeah. I'm kind of trying to think a way around it before so I don't.
Yeah, I can go start. So
sure.
I would say, so obviously, you know, I was kind of, you know, I talk about the picture I drew as a 3-year-old, but I've always been a very scientifically minded person, but I've always really wanted to go help people specifically one-on-one. And so like, I was always the tutor. I would always help people out. I would always stay after class. I would always stay after school and help people. And that really continued on throughout college. And so in college, I would always help out all the like kids in my dorm when they needed help with calculus, physics, and all their various classes. And I think, you know, so I was kind of debating, okay, should I go pursue a PhD or should I pursue other training? And I decided, you know, it's probably best for me to pursue a career where I can really have that one-on-one interaction with another person to really help them out when they're feeling down. And that's kind of what drove me to my current vocation.
Chad, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Pius. Go ahead.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I'm a very recent convert to the Catholic Church. I was welcomed into the church last April, back on Easter octave, and I've always felt this admiration for the Catholic priesthood since I started my conversion process. I've always loved the aesthetic, and I've always loved the symbolism and the way that the Mass is presented, and the consecration. Really, everything about the priesthood and its versatility throughout how it operates. And I've always had this admiration. I carried it with me through my conversion, but I did have I did have a very personal religious experience last summer where I felt I was watching an adoration procession, if you know what that is. If you ever been to Eucharistic adoration, where they put the host in the monstrous, and you sit and
That's
pray.
a very powerful time too.
Mhm.
I recently just went to one. I don't mean to interject.
Mhm.
Pius. Yeah,
It's
that's a very powerful time, especially when they speak Latin. It's amazing.
if you've ever been to one, it is a very power. If you've ever been to one that's like, it's not just like walking into the adoration chapel, but if you've actually been to a scheduled adoration session, it is a very powerful experience. I've been to two where I've been moved, and this is one of them. But we had a procession, and this priest, he picked up the monstrous, and he processed down the aisles with incense and with music playing, and we stood and prayed, and or knelt and prayed, or we just prayed in our either in our seats, knelt or standing, and during this time I was having a lot of trouble trying to figure out, like, because I had been welcomed into the church recently, and I'd have trouble accepting the dogma of the true presence, because for some reason in my mind I thought when I would first receive my first communion it would be like some magical experience that I'd never felt before, and it wasn't this emotional experience. So I was very disillusioned with the idea of the true presence, and and in my mind I had been debating this for a while, and as the adoration session happened, as he was processing along the aisles, I prayed to God and I said, you just need to send me a sign so that I know that you're there, because I'm having trouble. And when he processed by me with the host, something hit me. And I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was about the situation, but I felt this immense, I don't know how to describe it, but I think it's holiness. And I just dropped to the floor and I could do nothing but cry. And I was there, and all I could feel was just this immense, uh, what's the word, undeservingness. Like I didn't deserve to be there. I felt unworthy, and all I could do was just cry and just bask in this holy object that was processing by me, by God incarnate, who has allowed me to be in His presence, and, and and I all I could do was cry. And then after he passed me, I stood back up, and I had this desire. All I wanted to do was just to hold the monstrous myself. That was, I distinctly remember that was what I wanted to do. And ever since then, I started seriously considering the vocation to the priesthood. And fast forward some more time to about a month ago, and I've been going to discernment, and I've been I've been with my spiritual director. We've been discussing this, and and one night I just have this trouble. I'm just accepting my call and trying to figure out what I'm doing. I'm like, God, why would you choose me? Why would you put this desire in my heart when there are so many people who are more worthy than I? So many people who are more, who are more knowledgeable about you, about the way the church operates, about the doctrine, about the dogma. And why would you put this desire in my heart? And so I turned on a Fulton Sheen sermon, and I was listening to that, and I feel this little tug in my mind, and I don't know what it was, but I feel this tug. And so I pause the sermon, and I make the sign of the cross, and I go to prayer, and I say, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and I hear this voice in my head, and I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but I hear this voice, and I ask what it is, where it's from, and it says, "I'm Jesus Christ, the Son of the only living God. Hear my call." And of course I'm astounded, so I just sit and listen, and this voice, I mean, I may have just been me being crazy, but I presume it to have been the Lord, because it said it was, and it told me that He was calling me not because I was wise, because I was learned, because I was athletic, or because of any other reason than because He wanted me to love. He said, "I want you to love those who others can't. That's why I'm calling you to the priesthood." And
That's incredible.
here I am. So
Thank you for your very beautiful story. That's very.
I don't want to go after this. I feel like that's mine's not as miraculous, I think. Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff to meditate on. Wow, that's incredible. Okay. How do you go from here? Okay. I'm just like thinking. It's like, okay.
I felt like I was I didn't think it was that powerful. I mean, I felt like I kind of stuttered a lot. So, I mean, I'm glad it came off that way.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful.
Anyway, okay. So how do I begin this? So Chad wasn't always a Chad, right? I didn't always have an interest in physical fitness. It really came out of after I was getting through a lot of rough times through my high school year. I was not physically active at the time. And I noticed that when I would just start to participate in physical activity, my whole mood, my outset on life, everything changed for the better, I think. And that's when eventually I would start reading more and I would come back to the faith, right? And that's where I said, okay, so I want to pursue higher education. I've always had a desire to become a lawyer. I always had that, even like elementary school. It's like, yeah, I want to be in a courtroom one day. And I said, well, I always wanted to be a lawyer, so I want to make sure I do that. But, I think when I'm doing that, I also want to also help people meet their fitness goals too, because I know it's not as hard as as it really seems. I mean, you can take people who are just not physically fit whatsoever, and you could shape them with proper discipline to, someone who's actually got a lot of motivation and he's just, he's completely positive. And it was really other people who had those gifts, right, of being positive and being physically fit, who motivated me, and that changed my life. So, I mean, no miracles, but
No, but it's still a very
Still
important.
vocation.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of a synopsis of my current vocation right now, and I love doing it. Like, I mean, it's a great thing to juggle while you're in school. I mean, you're I'm the proper age for it. I'm physically fit. I'm able to show people like this is completely achievable.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and it works great. And I have work experience before. I have work experience. I have that kind of you meet a lot of people and you get to gain that social experience too. No, it works perfectly.
And I can tell you, working in medicine, that physical fitness is very undervalued. At least where I live, and perhaps where you do too. And it can help prevent so many health problems, and it can help enhance people both physically and mentally and spiritually.
Yeah, people really don't understand. If people were to, I think, consistently work out for, just give it a month, you'll notice that your mood and your outlook starts changing for the better. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. So our next question is, how do you? I guess this is kind of explained a little bit by our calls to vocation, but how do you know that you're called by a vocation, and how does one discern a vocation?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I can speak for everybody because my vocation is quite specific. I mean, I'm sure if you ask priests, I mean, even they'll have different reasons for why they came to the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, for me, it was I felt a desire and I heard God call me, and so now I'm pursuing it because I'm not going to disobey the living God.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, for me, it was more just like things started to click and they made sense. I mean, I actually discerned priesthood throughout my whole Marian consecration, which I just did. And, it was kind of a painful process because it was kind of like, okay, you had to like almost convince yourself, okay, am I really cut out for this? Because I had so many people, throughout the years, just like, maybe you should become a priest, maybe you should become a priest. And, and I know that's not for me. And just because it would feel like I'd be answering to, not necessarily to the Lord, but for everybody else. And I think the vocation has to click with you. You have to find some sort of inner peace and like, yeah, this makes more sense. And it comes at a very fundamental level that kind of goes beyond your reason. It just, it just makes sense. I'm content here.
Yeah, I agree.
And then that takes, I mean, that for some people that can take so long, right? But it takes a very, I think, an active lifestyle and a lot of prayer.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there has to be a prayer life really for you to find your vocation, at least your the religious aspect of your vocation.
Yeah, and you have to be open-minded and curious. You have to be open. It's like, okay, maybe like just be open to the to a suggestion, right?
When I first felt my when I first had my my first call at the Eucharistic adoration session, I thought for sure I was going to be a an FSSP priest because I wanted to celebrate the Latin Mass, and so of course I've now learned that's probably not what I'm going to be doing at all, but it took a lot of time for me to actually figure out, like, even when I knew I wanted to be religious, like what order I was going to join, whether I was going to be a priest or a friar or a brother or all this other stuff. It's not simple even when it seems that way.
Yeah, and I also think that, even though we're all young,
Mhm.
so we're all very young people, I
Yes.
think that the discernment process continues on even
Mhm.
later in life.
Oh yeah. There are priests who've been ordained like age 40, age 50.
Sure, yeah.
I know people who are doing discernment. They're like 30 years old. I mean, it takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes people like a couple of years after they've turned 18. Other times it takes them 20 years after they've turned 18. You have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. I remember I listened to a Fulton Sheen episode where he talked about this one priest. I believe it's Lesueur, but apparently Lesueur. But anyways, so he was originally an atheist in France, and he was basically the head atheist, like publishing a bunch of magazines about his public atheism. And his wife was a Catholic, and his wife always prayed for him. And on her deathbed, so she wrote him a letter saying, "I believe that you're going to become I believe it is a Dominican priest, or I can't remember what specific branch, but she told him, "Hey, I think that you are called to be a priest."
Mhm.
And he completely doubted it. And this is like an older man at this point. I think his wife was in her 40s when she died, and he was obviously older. And so he went to Our Lady of Lourdes in France to prove that wasn't true, to prove that there is no such thing as a God, to prove that he was an atheist. But even then, later in life, he went there and he was blown away, and he realized that he was called to become a priest
Yeah,
at that point.
Father Felix Lesueur.
Yes. So,
And his wife is actually a servant of God. She's on her way to sainthood.
mhm.
That's incredible.
And so I think even if you are older, even if you believe that you've messed up at some point in your life, I believe that we are all called to some vocation or another, and that it's never too late to discern a vocation. There's never too late to really truly pray upon how your life has ended up currently, and to ask God where he wants you to be.
Mm-hmm. Vocation could be permanent. It could be solved really like right after you've reached adulthood. It depends on every person. So if you don't discern your vocation by like age 25, don't worry about it. There are people who've taken, it's taken 30, 40 years for them to discern, even longer. The discernment doesn't always end, For some people it's immediate, for others it's a long time, and everybody's got their own pace.
Yeah. So I think one question that I am particularly interested in, and it's because I am still trying to I'm still struggling with this question, and it's because we each think that vocation is very important to society and to God and to ourselves. So how can we encourage vocations in our everyday lives?
I think I said it already, but daily prayer.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I've taken up the daily rosary, and I don't know what it's like to not have the rosary anymore, because you just gain more of that spiritual maturity, and just your life just like everything, just like things do change, right?
Mhm.
And it sounds trite, but it's true, right? And I think saying prayers, rosaries, very powerful prayers like that will help.
Most people I know, they did the rosaries probably the most effective for them, but actually for me it was Lectio Divina. So that's another good option to choose. If you've ever done Lectio Divina, that was a big instrument in discerning my future.
Yeah, do you know what I love? The Catholic Church has given us so many great, powerful prayers that just have worked miracles, right?
which you've done, Chad. Marian consecration's a big one too.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, liturgy of the hours.
Yeah. Divine office. What else? The meditation on the seven sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The chaplet of Saint Michael the Archangel. There's plenty of chaplets. Divine Mercy is a big one too. That one's become really popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had the tools are available, and I just say, take up and read, and now sit down and pray.
And I actually, this is just me, but I find that a lot of spiritual music's very helpful as well. Like, and I don't mean like like Protestant pop music. I mean like listening to like Bach's Mass in B, or like Mozart's Requiem, stuff like that, or Gregorian chant even sometimes helps inspire the mind and draw it closer to the Lord.
Yeah, I agree. I think also one thing that we need to consider is mentorship. I think that I find it sad that there are some people who they're at the top of their fields, but then they don't mentor people further down on their path. And I think that's a very, very important aspect of seeking your vocation, is finding somebody who's done the path before, so that you kind of have an idea of what you are called to and what you are called to and driven to experience.
I think that's a good way to sum it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think initially Catholic teachers were supposed to do that. But I mean, at least where I am, I don't know how. I mean, the public Catholic education is what I would call the superior Catholic education, but I think that was kind of be the original point of it, and it's a shame that I mean, my brother still goes through it. I mean, he's not religious, right? I don't think. I think mentorship is extremely important, and we know what it's like to not have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm looking through the chat for questions. I don't think that we want to discuss anime, so I'm gonna mix that question.
Asking all the relevant questions, I see.
Yes. Relevant questions. Any questions in the chat? Any takers?
There's one that was a little bit more relevant if Pius wants to answer it.
Which one?
It asks, were you raised fundamental Protestant?
As I answered, I was raised a Christmas, Easter only Protestant mostly.
A CEO.
Yeah, I rarely went to church except for when the Lutheran church that was attached to the private school I was attending at the time offered a confirmation program. So I attended, and I was confirmed a Lutheran, although a year later, not even a year later, probably about a month or two later, I became an agnostic, and I started my discernment towards, which eventually led me to Catholicism and then to where I am now. But that was like 4 years ago, so.
See.
Yeah, I remember I was, so on Ash Wednesday, I had ashes on my forehead, and a woman went up to me and said, "Oh, you're Catholic. You see, I'm a Cheester. I only go to Christmas and Easter." But, yeah.
Yeah, mine was more of a smudge. Mine wasn't really much of a cross.
Mine was a tiny cross.
Yeah.
Mine didn't look that great this year.
No, mine was like way off to one side of my forehead. So.
Oh dear. Yeah, I saw someone in the train, and I'm just like, "Hey, what are you giving up?" And she's like, "Oh." She was completely blindsided.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I mean, in Toronto, you're not going to see that many, I think. So.
So I think since there aren't any more questions in the chat, I think that we can do concluding remarks.
All right.
So I think for me, I think vocation is critically important, but unfortunately, we don't really have this culture of vocation. So I think what we need to do as a people is that we need to, first of all, recognize the importance of sacrifice, the importance of being called to do a service to God and to society. And I think it's critically important to seek mentorship for what we believe our vocations to be, and to continuously pray on our vocations, not only to ensure, basically to ensure that we are making the right decisions in our life and the decisions that God wants us to make.
I think that's a good way to sum it up. Any other things to add, Chad?
Not really. There is a question in the chat if someone wants to answer it, I think.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. For those people discerning later in life, late 20s, early 30s, what would you advise them to say to family and friends who believe they're copping out career-wise? Well, I mean, honestly, I'd just say that,
What matters more to you, right?
yeah, vocation doesn't end, I mean, it doesn't end when you're like 25. I mean, it could last, anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40 years. Your vocational discernment doesn't just take a halt once you've hit college age, right? And especially, I mean, even people who have had careers for long times find themselves entering the priesthood or becoming a brother. I mean, kings even like when they've resigned the throne have become monks at points. There's always an opportunity to discern vocation.
Mm-hmm.
And
what?
Yeah, that you're just giving up. That's kind of an ignorant way to look at it, in my opinion. I don't know if that's really anything you can tell people, but I mean that's how I view it.
I think you need to, just because our culture is so anti-vocation. Well, I wouldn't say anti-vocational, but kind of. It doesn't really.
It's ignorant of it.
It's ignorant of it. I would say. I would pray for them because, again, like as Jesus said, pray for them for they know not what they do, in a way. And I think another thing is just, you need to convince them that this is what God wants you to do. This is how that you can best help society, and that this is what you would not be satisfied with any career. You want to choose a career or a life. You want to choose a vocation where you will be what you're called to do, what you would be satisfied doing with.
It's never too late to give your life to God.
Mm-hmm. So, does that answer your question? Is that helpful? Okay. Well,
I think that was excellently done.
You think so?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank everybody for listening in to this first live stream. And thank you very much, King Chad and Pius, for joining me on this live stream.
Happy to be here. I hope I contributed.
Yeah. Thank you.
So take care and have a good night.